Hi, my name is Jeff Barrett, and on behalf of the Critical Path Institute, I'm delighted to spend the next few minutes with you discussing real-world data to support clinical trial designs and development programs. I'd first like to thank the organizers for inviting me. This is a very important topic, as many of you will agree, and something where I think we all recognize is a work in progress. We'll start this lecture by talking about the backdrop around real-world data, the landscape, as it were, the different types of real-world data, and then focus on the value proposition. And a key component is on data quality considerations. We'll shift gears a little bit to talk about the regulatory interest, which I think everybody at this stage knows is very high. And we'll give specific review of the benefit of incorporating real-world data into clinical trial designs and discuss how that is in fact accomplished. And I'll substantiate this by providing a few examples from my time at the Critical Path Institute. And we'll conclude with some messaging on what simply has to get better for us to pull this off in a realistic way in the future. So in terms of the backdrop upon which a lot of the real-world data interest comes from, I think this is something where many within the broad pharmaceutical development ecosystem recognize that there's pockets of stakeholders in diverse areas that support the exploration and continued development of comfort and examples using real-world data to facilitate drug development. And this comes from the physician community, patient advocates, as well as others in related industries such as digital health, as well as the commercial organizations. So all of them are driving meaningful use cases around how real-world data can facilitate and streamline drug development with the end game of providing better guidance as well as comfort in the prescribability of the medicines that ultimately become approved on the marketplace. But there needs to be a complementary effort that coincides with the demand to really ensure that this can be done with high fidelity. Now, if we take a look at the multitude of sources of real-world data, you'll see that this is very diverse. It comes from a lot of different sources, and it creates a lot of heterogeneity in both the data types and the requirements around the data, how that data is actually cared for. Now, one of the things that I think drives the interest is the diversity. If we look at the left-hand side of this chart, you'll see the variety of categories that this data falls in, everything from medication use, basic demographics, clinical encounters, procedures. So a lot of details around real-world use of medicines that would form the basis of understanding the existing standard of care even before we consider what a new medicine might look like overlaid on top of the current usage. Now, as we move from left to right, you'll see that both those who care for the data as well as their knowledge and expertise around things as data standards and curation changes. So it's not, again, very common that these adhere to similar standards or even provide guidance with respect to usability of the data. And in some cases, the data is in fact collected for very narrow and finite purposes that don't necessarily coincide with regulatory usage. So there's a lot of dirty work to be done in the middle of this table to make it useful. And then even when we move it further down to the right in unstructured data, it becomes even a more diverse landscape where the connectivity of data and how the data is specified in the core systems is not specified to any great extent. So there's a lot of effort in abstraction just to get the data to be accessible, let alone standardized and usable. Now, of course, the interest level is very high, and if we take a look at where this type of information could be used, in the middle of this chart, you'll see the typical timeline from preclinical through clinical stages of development. And then on the upper part of this figure is a list of areas where this type of information could be useful, and in fact, in some cases, has already demonstrated value. So understanding disease epidemiology, patient pathways and trajectories, helping to find the patients. So I think there's tremendous recognition that this data could be useful and usable if we can trust it. And then when we move into actually later stages and when we're trying to organize and develop a protocol, obviously recognizing that this could form the basis of the existing standard of care for endpoint selection, for patient selection. So there's a lot of potential value that this could be used. So the drug development interest is very high. In the bottom part of this slide, you'll see the various teams that would be involved within the confines of a pharmaceutical sponsor. What's important to know is that when we move from like the R&D and say preclinical and clinical stages of development into later stages where say medical affairs, health economic, and then eventually commercial teams get involved, their requirements for using the data are different, as well as their requirements on regulatory submissions. So all of this drives additional heterogeneity. So even within a single sponsor, there is potential diversity in terms of how they want to use the data and their requirements for data use. Again, making it even more complex. Now, as a potential end user, what we're all interested in is high quality data, having the data standardized in some fashion that needs to be agreed upon, making the data integrated so that it can be coupled with data from, let's just say, more confined and specified sources such as clinical trials, registry data, etc., other data that the industry would have access to, and ultimately to make it analysis ready. This is not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination, and the ability to impose this is a heavy lift for some organizations. So this is where the requirements need to be specified up front, and where there needs to be consistent effort to make sure that the pooled data is in fact analysis ready. Now, just a little bit on what we mean specifically by harmonization integration. So we can take a look at this figure as an analogy here. If I have all of these cables at my disposal and I'm trying to plug them in to make an eventual data source, an analogy here, if I'm in there with the state of current electronics. So there's great intention to use that device, but recognizing that I have to contend with all these connectors. It would be great if someone built us this universal connector up front and where we could connect all the devices seamlessly, where this was all worked out into a single plug. Now, even though I'm showing you an image where that's possible, this is not built for real world data at the moment. So I think one of the endeavors, and certainly this is an objective at CPATH, is to construct a platform by which this can be at least approached. But that is in fact the analogy here, is to take the diversity of data and to build something that's usable in as an expedient manner as possible and with the least FTE spend. On that regard, I'm going to show you two specific examples, and these are both with the intention and focus of support from the Food and Drug Administration, recognizing that both of these target populations, neonates and rare diseases, are places where we are dealing with a paucity of data, and where being able to use real-world data would add value and would facilitate drug development in both of these unmet medical need populations. So we'll focus on neonates first. So the umbrella organization that supports a lot of the collaborative research is the International Neonatal Consortium. This is a public-private partnership that has existed for over a decade now. They have a great track record at driving the science to answer a lot of questions around the design of neonatal trials, about the quality of some of the source data, and recognizing some of the gaps. I think the other thing that's very clear is that this continues to be a place where we operate in a paucity of data, and still an issue where only a handful of drugs in fact have meaningful guidance provided in the drug label for neonates. So it's clearly a place where we're able to change the landscape by being able to use real-world data. This would have tremendous value. Recognize again that this is a global multidisciplinary community. There's participation from a multitude of regulatory agencies, pharmaceutical organizations, both nursing and patient advocates, as well as a huge complement of academic centers around the world. So this community has come together, recognized the need, and they roll up their sleeves and get dirty with a lot of the work to be done. They have an excellent track record at driving some of the science about giving guidance for novel study designs in neonates specifically. So I think this is a good home for this type of effort, and they're able to really drive the science in a way that will allow us to share the ultimate data sources in a meaningful way. Again, more experience from publications illustrating that they've been productive and they're a good home for this effort. Now, the grant opportunity was created from the FDA consistent with their efforts to make the most of it and really learn the usability factor around real-world data, and in this case, specifically for neonates. I'm listing on this slide the aims from the grant that we were fortunate enough at CPATH in collaboration with the INC to focus on over the next couple of years. Again, keep in mind that some of the aims around leveraging the analytics platforms that are already existing and understanding the quality of the data are key aspects of this grant. No one assumes upfront that all of the data that we will have access to is exactly usable in the same manner. So an expectation from the FDA as well as this whole community is for us to report on the quality and to give guidance on context of use for different purposes. So this valuation of data quality is a key component to the grant. And in order to demonstrate that in a meaningful way, we have two pilots to illustrate in a context of use opportunity specific projects. One of them is to build a disease progression model incorporating real-world data for bronchopulmonary dysplasia. Again, you see the co-chairs there. We have really the dream team of academic scientists, regulatory authorities, and operational colleagues who really understand the requirements around collating this information, providing guidance in terms of data privacy, the curation, standardization of the data. What you see on the slide here is recognizing the diversity of input data that we will have contributed from electronic medical records, from natural history data, from registry data that will be accumulated. And we've already made great progress in receiving a lot of this data. So it's clearly a work in progress, but we're not skipping any steps here. So a lot of the dirty work to be done will be ensuring patient privacy around the curation aspects and then providing metadata so that when we are sure of the quality piece and the standardization, that it will be accessible in an easy tool and framework and then ultimately connected to a tool. So in this case, we don't get to the far right of this slide to build the model until all of the dirty work in terms of curating the data and standardizing it is in place. Keep in mind here too, when we're pulling data from some of these real-world sources, we're not talking about CDISC standards. It would be wonderful if that was the case, but clearly not put in that format. So we have to look at new standards such as OMAP and other solutions here as the backdrop on which we will create standards for the entirety of the integrated data. A complementary effort is to take a look at laboratory values to guide patient selection and enrollment criteria across different therapeutic areas for neonatal clinical research. This is again another place where we have the benefit of a very enlightened clinical team to give us guidance and to take a look across the different sources at the variability and the heterogeneity of the data types and to give guidance back in terms of data quality. So if we're going to be able to use this data in a meaningful way, it clearly has to be viewed in the context of the intended purpose. So this is another pilot that we're heavily engaged in and a part of this grant as well. So again, this just illustrates the next step. So once this data is accumulated and we have a quality assessment, this will also be vetted with therapeutic areas, subject matter experts, and with the FDA before it is shared among the broad stakeholder community. So there will be a guideline provided in terms of both the heterogeneity and the quality aspects. It's a key component of both the laboratory value piece as well as the disease progression model for bronchopulmonary dysplasia. There's, again, a lot of expectations here, but we were not going to skip any steps. This will be done in a manner that allows us complete transparency, and we'll be reporting the progress along the way. A complementary effort with the work with INC is another grant that we have the benefit of FDA support and guidance on, and that is to build the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator data analytics platform. Similar to the work at INC is collating data across all 8,000 rare diseases, providing it in a standardized and curated manner, and also building tools that allow us to exploit the data to hopefully advance the development of rare disease cures. This is done in collaboration with our partners at the National Organization for Rare Disorders and with the support of FDA. So the expectation here is that when we build this platform, when we accumulate, again, the diversity of real-world data sources, that this would be able to be integrated with traditional sources such as registry data, completed clinical trials, and even preclinical data to provide meaningful tools and allow sponsors to ask questions around how the disease progresses, about how to find patients. So this slide kind of illustrates in a similar manner the workflow, illustrating on the left-hand side of the diversity of data types that we expect to accumulate in the platform, and then the process and workflow of providing good security around the incoming ingested data in the data vault, a level of curation that is really accomplished from our data collaboration center in partnership with the platform developers Iridia, a lot of the ontology mapping standardization, as well as reformatting and cleaning is done by a combination of the platform itself, in addition with our experienced data scientists. And eventually, as in the previous diagram, we are providing data in an analysis-ready format such that it can be used with good confidence and high fidelity to build tools to accelerate rare disease drug development. The platform was only launched in September 14th, so it's clearly a work in progress, but we've made, again, I think a strong initial volley here, and people are using the platform, which is exciting. This is a couple of screenshots that show you the metadata that's available. So the data is highly curated and indexed, easy to search and find the information as a sponsor comes into this platform. You can abstract segments of the data and do very basic analytics. So it's got baseline functionality up and running right now, with the ability to build APIs and expand the functionality by different tools. So this is not just about creating a suitcase of data. Our expectation here is that we will encourage the broad rare disease ecosystem to come together and support and co-develop tools that will allow us to accelerate rare disease drug development. We have a good track record of doing this. Again, this is not a place where we have enough resources entirely at CPATH. We're expecting this community to come together and work with us and the entire ecosystem to both contribute data and to build tools with a high degree of fidelity where we have a well-defined context of use so that clinical regulatory authorities can use it with confidence as well. We have a process in place to do this, a good track record from this standpoint. Existing models in both Friedreich's ataxia and PKU are up and running and available right now. So you can, if you get access to the system, which is easy from our website, immediately see what inventory is already available and then contribute both data and guidance in terms of model development. What I'm showing on this slide is just a snapshot of some of the analytics that are currently available in the system. Again, these are connected to the platform so that you can index both models and data sets. And clearly, this is something that we're expecting to expand. So the early work in a number of these rare diseases, and in this case, I'm showing some examples of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's where we have mature tools, again, not necessarily rare diseases, but gives you an idea of the types of things that can and will be built for this target population. Some of the early work, as I mentioned, in PKD and kidney transplant is already being connected to the platform. And the work that we showed during the platform launch in Friedreich's ataxia is a work in progress that clearly has the expectation of driving the design of future trials in FA. And this, again, is done in collaboration with academic investigators, with pharmaceutical sponsors, and clinical regulatory authorities. So clearly illustrating the value as well as the multidisciplinary requirement. Now, in conclusion, what absolutely has to get better is the issue around data quality. We will take everything as we have at the beginning here, but in the future, we're hoping to drive the expectation that data quality can get better. We're also hoping to give guidance in terms of standardization and best practices around data integration from the coupling of real-world data sources with traditional structured data. Obviously, this can't be the only contribution to examples here. We will provide a report card on this effort, but our expectation that this will be something that we encourage collaboration on with a variety of partners. So we're not in this alone, and we're part of the reason to give this talk in the first place is encourage you to collaborate and participate in a meaningful way. I leave you with a couple of references that illustrate the use case the current progress and use cases, but also in terms of the expectation for this effort in the future. With that, I'll be happy to answer questions.